Hello and welcome to this year's final episode of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko. 2022 is the year we saw the end of the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture, corruption and fraud in the public sector, including, of course, organs of state. Throughout the year, Chief Justice Zondo delivered the 6-volume report to President Cyril Ramaphosa, and the country got to see the Commission's findings after 4 years of investigations and testimonies. Tonight, we revisit a state capture report and some of its findings. The Watchdog starts now. In the 5th volume of the State Capture Report, Chief Justice Raymond Zondo recommended a separate inquiry into the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa, which is the focus of tonight's episode. While evidence had been given at the Commission in relation to Prasa, Chief Justice Zondo made it clear in the report that there may be more to uncover around the state agency. Former Prasa Board Chair Bob Pomolefe, who had also given evidence at the Commission of Inquiry, joined me at the beginning of the year to speak about some of the issues uncovered in Zondo's probe.
Well, Vuyo, from the outset, when the public protector made recommendations that a state capture commission be appointed, it was in recognition of the fact that the country had a myriad of problems that needed to be addressed if we were to maintain good governance in the country and ultimately achieve the strategic goals of our liberation struggle. The fact that the Commission, after 4 years of hard work and many difficulties, some people who did not really want to give evidence that reflected the true facts, has now been able to release the report is something commendable. And we should congratulate the Deputy Chief Justice Zondo for ultimately, releasing this report after that a marathon of hearing and investigation. We are delighted that ultimately we have something that provides a program from which the government of the Republic of South Africa, which is the executive authority, and the state, the various arms of the state, law enforcement agencies, the police, hawks you call them, and ordinary criminal investigating agencies, as well as the National Prosecuting Authority, can now begin to act decisively with the objective of restoring confidence of the public in these institutions, and of course, in a sense, also restoring their own integrity as institutions. But above all, of course, to make sure that those who are to be held accountable are so held accountable, be they politicians, ordinary civil servants, those in the private sector, and those who were just being used as the runners, but did not avail themselves of the opportunity to disclose what they knew about the corruption and fraud that had taken place.
Were you surprised, if I may start there, at the finding or the conclusion of the Commission that indeed there was state capture?
I was not surprised, Vuyo, because as you may recall, at some point I appeared like I was a lone voice speaking against corruption when I was the chairman of Prasa. And I'm sure there would have been some people in little corners in the party that I belong to who would have said, but Comrade Popo should not be saying what he's saying because this is damaging to the image of the party. So, I mean, I was expecting this outcome to be there because even as we went through that long fight, there was hardly a whimper in any corners within my own organization or the government that said, we think that this man is doing the right thing as he's defending the values that our movement espoused and the values that reflect the nature of society that many years of our sacrifices of struggle were intended to achieve. So I was not surprised. I was expecting that this would be the outcome.
Now, the party you belong to is gathering in Limpopo this weekend, and today, as they were doing the build-up to the weekend, journalists asked both the president and the deputy president for their initial reaction, and those are the bites we played earlier. From what you heard, the little you were able to hear them say at the beginning of the program, and from the conversations, of course, you would have been having with some of your comrades during the course of this inquiry, and as this day of the release of the report was nearing. Do you have a sense that things are going to change for the better?
Well, Vuyo, I think whether things change for the better is a function of the balance of forces. If the balance of forces within the party and within society are tilting in favor of those who are predominantly implicated in this corruption, then we're going to have an uphill battle to make sure that things change for the better. But I think what we can rely on is the fact that it is no longer a one-man show or a one-party show where you rely on one party to make a determination whether things will change for better or not. I think over the last 10 years, there has been a resurgence of civil society organization and the consolidation thereof, and a greater outspokenness of civil society. And to that extent, I think the initiative no longer belongs to the politicians, but to society through their various institutions and organs. And to that extent, therefore, I think whether certain individuals like it or not, I think civil society will make sure that what is best for the people of South Africa, particularly the poor people, in whose name and who themselves were part of this struggle. The struggle was conducted to change fundamentally their conditions of living for the better, to make sure that we move away from a situation where sectarian institutions called political parties govern, to a point where the people govern as is envisaged in the democratic constitution of our country, which was adopted in 1996. To that extent, I think society has reached inexorably a point where it cannot be stopped from ensuring that the right things are done justice is restored, and real democracy is placed in the real power is placed in the hands of the people.
I think that's a very important point to make, because indeed, to get the ANC to sit up and notice even before those in Parliament and Luthuli House and elsewhere could even begin, to do something about the issues that society was raising. It took civil society to agitate for that change, and that indeed is a very important point to make. Now, the Commission, from the part 1 of the report, found that President Zuma fled the Commission because he knew that there were questions that would be put to him which he would not have been able to answer. Now, he's not alone. There are a lot of other people who went, as you said earlier, as forthcoming as they should have. Even the runners among them, who perhaps you would have thought, don't have a lot to lose. Do you not think that, in the next few weeks and months, we are going to see this group of people re-emerging? Because after all, it may well be the ANC, that is the last barrier, or stops them or prevents them from facing the music based on the back of the decisions that they've taken not to come before the inquiry. It may well be the ANC that stands between them and jail. It may well be the ANC that stands between them and hunger and poverty, because the largesse, that they were able to derive, from their association or from leadership positions that they were or have been occupying within the ANC. All of those things may change or actually come to an abrupt end. Do you not foresee a situation where that whole block, may again regroup and put up a big fight?
Well, I suppose, Vuyo, it is expected that those who find themselves vulnerable may attempt to defend themselves, but that probably could be considered to be the proverbial, the last kick of the dying horse. The reality is that the will has turned to a point where that kind of resistance will not survive. But those who knowingly did not disclose the truth that they knew are going to face very serious difficulties, because if you think of the PRECA, which is the Prevention of and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act, provides for, it says that to the extent that you know of corruption and you do not disclose, you yourself are guilty of an offense. I think whether those people ultimately are brought to book is a function of fact and evidence that the Hawks, various investigating agencies and the National Prosecuting Authority would place before the court, and it will also be a function of how thoroughly they prepare their case to make sure that they achieve the objectives of the mandate, constitutional mandate defined for them in our Constitution.
Now, as a former chairperson of Prasa, who knew and, before the commission detailed some of the wrongs you saw there, and currently chairperson of another huge parastatal, Transnet, which too was hollowed out, and a lot is going to come around what happened there. And one of its former CEOs, actually, the commission is recommending that he be prosecuted. But from what you've seen lately, Are there increased levels of accountability now? Is there less political pressure that provide fertile ground for the wrongs to be committed? What about the work of the deployment committee, which was put into sharp focus during those hearings? What about the pawns? The people who were pawns in this big game, but of course who were useful for the powerful people who derived huge financial benefits from the wrongs that were being committed. Just looking at the past year or two, have those things changed, or is that environment or atmosphere beginning to change for the better?
For you, where I am in Transnet, I must say that there is no political pressure on us, and in any event, the kinds of people who have been appointed to the board of Transnet and the executive team of Transnet are the sorts of people who would not buckle under pressure of politicians. But you know that I don't allow politicians to manipulate me. I was in the trenches with them. We were comrades. We were operating with each other on the basis of equality. It cannot be that now that I am no longer a politician, I am in a state-owned company, I would allow them to flout the principles, the policies, and the values of the organization for personal gains. So it cannot happen to the extent that for as long as I am there. Well, there are others. I must say that I'm still concerned about the weaknesses that I continue to see in Prasa. We had cases there. We won cases of corruption. One of them was in respect of the not fit for purpose locomotives, for which 2.6 billion had already been paid, and the court ruled that the 13 locomotives that they had delivered be returned to the supplier, and that the 2.6 billion rands be recovered by Transnet. That has not been done. I'm advised that Transnet thinks that it can adjust those locomotives, but we know that Vosloo, which was the manufacturer of the locomotives, after attempting to adjust the locomotives, it concluded that they cannot be adjusted to the required level of compliance with the safety requirement, both of Transnet, rail network, as well as the rail safety regulator. So I don't know. We're still waiting to hear how the new board thinks it can resolve this problem. And I think the government has to be decisive in dealing with these questions, because we can't keep saying we're fighting corruption. We win a case in court and nothing happens about the billions that the company has lost as a result of irregular procurement, not fit for purpose locomotives, and the 2.6 billion rands paid, a lot of which in advance, when only 13 locomotives had been released. So I do say that I do think that the situation has changed, but obviously those in executive authority have got to make sure that the entities that report to them also safeguard the interests of the public, and they act in a manner compliant with the provisions of the Constitution, Section 217 of the Constitution, but also in respect of the rulings that the courts in this country have given. The President, in one of his comments yesterday, said he congratulated and thanked the whistleblowers who came forward. But what the President did not say is what he was going to do about those whistleblowers who are being tormented. He did refer to those who have lost their jobs, but others are being tormented and forced out of job by entities that report to ministers who report to him. I think the president has to deal with this question. It cannot just be something that we glibly go over. It's important that we firmly address these questions so that we send a message to whistleblowers that the government cares, the public cares, and South African society cares.
Time to take a quick ad break. In a moment, we revisit a conversation I had with Khanyisile Kweyama, who is a former board chairperson at Prasa, who took us through her experience on the Prasa board as we continue to look back on the year that was. Details of the malfeasance at Prasa took up the bulk of the fifth installment of the Zondo Commission report. And upon its release, I spoke to former Prasa board chair Khanyisile Kweyama to get her views on Zondo's assessment of the agency, and this is how that conversation went. Just from what you've been able to read, your takeaways or what stood out for you?
Vuyo, what stood out is that perhaps many of the issues that were known about Prasa have now emerged, or rather were not known about Prasa have emerged. And I fully support what the now Chief Justice has said about a more detailed investigation into Prasa. As you will be aware, I mean, you've obviously mentioned the former CEO, Mr. Montana, as one person that recommendations have been made against. But in this report, also a number of executives have also been listed as requiring further investigation as to whether they should be prosecuted relating to the tenders and the malfeasance at Prasa. This is what we found when we were at the board of Prasa that I chaired, is that many of the executives at Prasa have been involved. And you just find layers and layers of corruption at Prasa that are very difficult to penetrate when you are relying on those very same executives to be the people that run the organization. So as a board, you find a lot of frustration. When we started at the Prasa board, there were many investigations that had been done by National Treasury. Some of them had been outsourced to private law firms, private investigators. And none of those have actually featured in the current reports. So there is a lot at Prasa that has happened. There are many people who have benefited over the years. It's almost like it's hard to find somebody that was innocent at the executive. And this is not to cast aspersions on the many men and women who are doing a lot of good work at Prasa. There are a lot of whistleblowing reports that were never came to the surface at the commission. As a board, we received many whistleblowing reports that we could not ever conclude in the time that we were there. So further investigation will definitely surface those so that Prasa can recover, so that Prasa can get rid of people who are only there looking for a buck, feeling that if other people have done it, I can also do it. And so that the passengers can get the service that they require, rather than people who are more interested in benefiting from a procurement.
Let's start with the former Prasa CEO, Lucky Montana. A short while ago, he was on our sister program, The Full View. He insists that you can talk about a lot of mistakes that may have happened, but corruption wasn't one of them. Take a listen to what Lucky Montana had to say a short while ago.
What I asked myself, did Chief Justice Zondo assist the country? Because before we look at ourselves, the biggest test of this report is whether it enables us to solve our problems. Of course, we must hold people like myself when public office accountable, but also must lay the basis to take our country forward, unite. When I look at that and having gone into the details of the report, I'm afraid to say that the report fails the biggest test. Currently, I think Chief Justice Zondo has responded so much to those, the gang that calls for, we want to see orange overall. Since I left Prasa, I've been investigated by the Hawks, I've been investigated by the SIU, and I think the result will be the same. If they do a proper investigation, they'll actually find that all the things they're talking about are false. When I testified at the commission, I actually demonstrated to the chairperson of the commission and his team that the Sufambo contract was not a corrupt contract. I actually dealt with the numbers because at the time, Chief Justice was actually banging the table that this contract of 3.5 billion, I said, that's the value of the contract, but we spent only 2.6 billion rands. And if you break down those amounts, you'll see that almost 1.9 billion of that amount went to the business of the trains. You see that 300 million rands of that 2.6 also went to paying SARS tax, and 100 million rands went to about, I think, customs. So that left you with 200 million rands. Now the report takes, it presented as part of its evidence the numbers that were presented by one, I think, Mr. Sachs, who was formerly with one of the companies that was doing the investigations. Those numbers, in fact, are a clear demonstration when you look at the money flows, that you can talk about irregularities or problems there and there, but corruption is not one of those.
Your thoughts on what you had to say?
So I think what Mr. Montana omits to say in his what needs to be checked and what doesn't need to be checked is whether the service was actually delivered, whether the product was actually delivered, and whether it functioned and whether it did serve the passengers as it was supposed to, which it didn't. And you will obviously know the stories about the two toll trains and whether it is valid or not valid. But the bottom line is what we inherited and what we found when we got there was that the product that was delivered was not, what do I call it, congruent with South African standards. What we found in those flow of funds reports was that as soon as money went into an account, it exited the very next day. There are commissions that remained unexplained. So there is a lot behind that. And as I say, that this is what Mr. Montana omits to say in his presentation of what Mr. Zondo did, or rather Justice Zondo did or did not do. And I think that's what lies at the heart of corruption, in that what went into people's pockets as opposed to what went into delivering the product. And we cannot by any means say that just because we brought this new invention to South Africa, therefore everything else should not be looked at because there you see the train standing there. So yeah, there is a lot more to be answered, and my view of the report and what the findings have been is that, like any court of law, everybody presents their side of the story, and the adjudicator, who is the Chief Justice in this instance, makes a ruling together with the teams of legal experts that were surrounding him. And I cannot now cry foul when the verdict and all the evidence shows that there was malfeasance in the organization.
I mean, recently, Prasa came before Parliament, and among the things that were said was that they need 1 billion annually for security over the next 3 years. They were also, of course, bemoaning, the theft of, in fact, this is in part is to protect or to deal with the issue of copper theft. vandalization, and so on. Without, if there wasn't the malfeasance we are talking about, or that has come through from testimonies of people who came before the commission, do you think that Prasa today would be sitting with such problems?
Probably not. You know, without malfeasance, there was enough funding, the budget was there to deliver and to ensure that everything functions. I mean, you've touched on another area, which is security, that over the years, security contracts were awarded at Prasa that were irregular, that did not deliver on what they were supposed to deliver. And the sadness of inheriting such a system is that when it hits the ceiling, it almost looks like you who were sitting there at the time did not do your work. But indeed, it's stuff that has been building up over the years where companies were paid and did not do their work. You know, the infrastructure at Prasa was being destroyed long before today. Companies were paid, but thieves would come in and rob, while security companies were paid to be at Prasa. So a lot could have been achieved had people been doing what they're paid for and people being delivering the service that they are supposed to deliver. I mean, there were security cameras that were supposed to be installed at stations. On one of our first visits, we went around all the stations in Gauteng, in other provinces, and the security cameras were not functioning. In some of the stations, we found that the security cameras were even facing the wrong direction, which shows that nobody ever followed up after they were installed to do quality control, to see that they were functioning. And those are things that you end up dealing with instead of focusing on the strategy, which is what a board is appointed to do. So too many people didn't do their work because they didn't care. They knew that I've paid somebody to give me this contract and I don't have to deliver because whoever was the recipient is happy with whatever money he has received. I mean, lifestyle audits, that is something that is still outstanding at Prasa because there was a lot of, there were many people who lived lifestyles that were not consumerate with the salaries that they were earning, and you wonder where that is coming from. So once again, yes, further investigations will show that. And I guess Mr. Montana is saying to what end, you know, how much do you have to dig? But I think even talking as a citizen of this country and everything that we see happening in the streets, people unhappy with service delivery, people feeling that enough is enough, you know, those people are owed to get the truth so that we can start rebuilding, because we can never rebuild if it's based on a false premise.
But then, I mean, someone else might say, look, this particular commission has cost a lot of money already. And I've had a number of people saying it's understandable that it has taken so long, that it has cost so much already, even though some say, you know, the amount of money spent, almost $1 billion or thereabout, you know, doesn't justify, you know, what has actually come out of it. Maybe we should stop right here, forget perhaps about, you know, yet another inquiry that may take time, lots of extensions, you know, and at the end of the day, still not address, you know, all the challenges facing these state-owned enterprises. Should a case, or can a case not be made for saying, you know what, whatever the state capture inquiry has revealed up until now, let's take that as lessons to be learned, get those who have been caught to their hands on the till, you know, to pay back the money or be prosecuted. Let's learn lessons from everything that has happened, but perhaps use whatever money we're going to throw into a commission to actually give a Prasa what it needs right now, the $1 billion or so it says it needs for security, to make sure that you know, it goes back to delivering on its mandate. What would be your view if someone was to make that argument?
Vuyo, I think there is merit in saying, call it a day somewhere and move on, because you could be in commissions of inquiry and investigations for the next 20 years. But I think the negative of that is that those who probably got away with things and are just below the radar would then think, oh, well, I got away with it this time and I can continue because I'm not of that profile that I can, that I will be in the spotlight and I will therefore be investigated. So that is the one risk. I'm all in favor of a TRC, for lack of a better word, where if people are willing to come out and tell the truth and reconcile, for lack of a better word, if that can be a form of a process that is undertaken. I'm no expert on those, but I'm just talking now as a citizen who also wants to move on and see service delivery happening. So it's not about not having a commission of inquiry. It's probably about the nature of the commission of inquiry and what the terms of reference would be to ensure that it doesn't go into another 3 years and it doesn't go into extra expenditure. I made the example to you of previous investigations that were conducted by National Treasury at Prasa, any expenditure above 10 million. And I think it's sad, and it's a travesty of justice, really, that those end up lying in a shelf somewhere, gathering dust. When we're at Prasa, we then call the SIU in at some stage to look at those contracts and to take matters forward. And I think an exercise would need to be done to determine how far the SIU has gone ever since there's now a new board in place. Have they taken those forward? So do almost like a check, a reality check on all the investigations that have been done, and don't start the ball, or rather the wheel turning from the beginning. Rather start at a point, because yes, there is also investigation fatigue that then kicks into an organization. When too many investigations have been done, the same people are expected to come and give evidence and all that type of thing. So I'm in support of a form of a process, but I do agree that it has to have limitations and it has to take on a lot of the information and investigations that already exist and conclude them and take them on to the next step rather than reinvent the wheel.
Two issues I want to very quickly, I know I've got to let you go now. I want to canvass with you, one coming out of this report, but also an issue that people have been talking about on the back of what we have seen and heard from the very first report that Judge Zondo came up with. One is the power of politicians to appoint board members at state-owned enterprises. The view of the Commission is that this should be diluted to avoid the recapture of state firms. A quick one on that.
I agree entirely. And, I've been both on the boards of SABC and the boards of Prasa, and one does know the harm that can happen with political interference. So that does need to be relooked at, and so that the boards are completely independent. At this stage, the boards are not independent. I've had examples when you've planned something as a board and a minister then comes and like, okay, this is how I'm going to do it. So that needs to be changed indeed, so that the boards can do the jobs that they're supposed to do and be independent. And
one of, the other things that have come out of this process has been the protection of whistleblowers on the one hand, and on the other, support but also protection given to those who move into these entities, try to turn them around, try to get these entities to go back to their respective mandates. Once upon a time, while you were the chairperson of the board, you were hijacked, kidnapped, pepper sprayed, bundled into a boot of a car, driven around for a good few hours. Just your thoughts on the protection of both whistleblowers, but also of those who then, have the courage to move in and start turning the situation around.
Absolutely, Vuyo. And, protection to both. And protection doesn't mean 1,000 bodyguards. Protection just means the ability to do your work without interference, without fear or favor, and without the risk to your life, as has happened not only in my instance, but other people at Prasa and other state-owned entities who had their lives threatened. So the protection is very important, and that needs to be written into some statutes to ensure that the consequences of threatening people and the consequences of actually carrying out actions against people who all they want to do is do a good job for their country should be ensured.
I want to thank you very much for your time this evening. She is, of course, a former board chairperson of Prasa. More than 250 pages of the more than 1,000 pages or so report devoted to Prasa. The Commission also recommending that a further full-on inquiry be instituted.
The President is committed to consider the Commission's report in its totality and to present a comprehensive response and implementation plan to Parliament. The Presidency will therefore not respond at this stage to specific aspects of the Commission's findings and recommendations.
Well, while we wait for the comprehensive response from the President, he said he needs about 4 months to decide what to do with the entire report, and also what he himself, or how he himself has come out of this report, must be said not smelling of roses. Is there something he needs to do, or he will need to do, to redeem himself? Well, my next guest is Angelo Fick, who is the director of Socio-Economic Research Institute, AWAL. Good evening, Angelo. It's been a while. Hope you're well. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Just your thoughts overall, what the report had to say about the President.
So the report draws a distinction, good evening, Vuyo, between what the President said as President of the Republic of South Africa, yes, and what Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa suggested the ANC did as in his capacity as President of the party. And it found that when he was the Deputy President, he was certainly in a position to have acted in ways that were certainly more forceful than he did, and that it didn't always find it so convincing, the Commission didn't, when he outlined the limitations of his actions and that he had acted when it was necessary. He had acted in the case of Des van Rooyen's appointment, he'd acted in relation to the banks, but there were all sorts of other issues that the timeline didn't support for the Commission, including the fact that there had been all sorts of media reports about serious allegations and credible allegations of state capture as early as 2011. And then in his role as the ANC president, there were all sorts of queries around how the ANC acted and when it acted. And certainly the Commission drew the conclusion that, among other things, the ANC often didn't act in time in relation to the allegations, or sometimes simply collected their own members' complaints, but didn't act on them. And that certainly speaks very poorly of all sorts of people, not just Mr. Ramaphosa, who were in senior leadership positions and claimed to have opposed state capture.
Let's talk about him as the Deputy President of the country for a second. His view is that, upon being confronted by the fact or reality that he actually failed to speak out, his retort was that, he had to fight it from within. Had he resigned, because he did serve at the behest of, his boss, the president of the country at the time, Jacob Zuma, you would not have seen what eventually happened. In other words, if people like him had simply opted out or had spoken out and then were ejected, a lot of the changes that subsequently came, which South Africans appreciated, would actually not have come. Maybe would still be stuck, where things were at the time.
Except that as Member of Parliament and then later as Deputy President, he took an oath of office to put the country before the party's interests, and therefore additionally before his own. And so the question that the Commission asks quite explicitly in one of its concluding sections on Mr. Ramaphosa is, what did he know, when did he know it, and what did he do about it? And those are crucial questions to be able to answer. Because if the president didn't know, and he indicated at various points that he only knew as deputy president of specific instances and intervened on those instances, the question is, why didn't he know about the many other instances given what was available in the public? And so what the Commission is suggesting is that inferences drawn from Mr. Ramaphosa's testimony set against the public record is that, all sorts of judgments were made by Mr. Ramaphosa and people in his camp who supported the notion of going up against state capture, that speak to their balancing act, that they wanted to balance out the party's interests and the longevity of the ANC with the continued or with the attempt to undo the damage that was being done in the state. And while the Commission says it cannot engage in counterfactuals, it must be questioned exactly whether or not that decision was necessarily the best decision in the interest of the country. Because what the president proposed, as in his testimony when he accounted for his role as deputy president, was that any other scenario would have been worse. But that we have no evidence to support that. We only have the evidence of his inaction or seeming inaction in relation to what was already in the public domain and what the Constitution and his oath of office would have required of him to do. Because there are all sorts of people across the board who are being recommended for criminal prosecution because they didn't do the due diligence of reporting illegal actions or acting on it. And if we are to protect whistleblowers, really, you cannot have somebody sitting in the deputy presidency position and claim that he didn't know what was on the front pages of newspapers, on the airwaves for radio and television stations, and at the same time claim that he was acting in the national interest. And that, I think, is a conflict that is one that Mr. Ramaphosa is going to have to address in his response eventually, and that South Africans will have to answer for themselves for all public and political officials across party lines in the future when it comes to these kinds of challenges.
In fact, what the Commission also didn't find evidence of was that there would be, or there would have been dire consequences for him had he spoken up or like taken action, that he himself did not provide, that evidence that indeed that's what would have happened had he acted differently in a manner consistent, as you say, with his oath of office.
And acted earlier, and this was the point of the Commission, that the timing of the actions was part of the problem. That by the time Mr. Ramaphosa acted as deputy president, 4 years had passed since the first issues of state capture had come to the public domain. And this has been a problem, I think, for governing parties around the world, but particularly also in South Africa, this ignoring of the public record because it appears in the media. We've had ministers of government or a minister of government stand up in court and deny that an action that was happening at the time, the leaving of another head of state, that they were required to detain because of their domestication of the Rome Statutes, wasn't happening despite photographic evidence, because he said that is happening in the media, it isn't happening in reality. And this role that politicians play of simply denying the public record by denouncing journalists, while at the same time wanting to use journalists, is something that I think we really in South Africa, on the back of what you've heard from Eunice Karin, have to address, because this is where public interest broadcasting and public broadcasting and public interest media are very, very important.
Well, that's it for tonight and for this year. Let's meet again on Monday. Have a good night.